So in this video, we are going to talk about the tools to use in Illustrator. Now, we're not going to use all of these tools because you can see there's an extensive amount of tools that we can utilize in this program, but we're not going to use all of them. We're going to use just a few basic ones. So I'm going to go through an overview with some of these tools so that you know how to use a few of them and what they do. And then we'll go through a more extensive view of some of the tools that are very important, like for instance the pen tool. So first off, we're gonna start at the top. So this tool here, which is essentially a black arrow, is called the selection tool. And if you just hover over the tool with your cursor, with your mouse cursor, typically a name will pop up and it will tell you the exact name for that particular tool. So this is the selection tool. So the selection tool allows you to create or have the ability to move and select objects. So for instance, we can't really select anything in here yet because we don't have an object in here. So let's bring in a square. Okay, and just change the color of it, and you can see we have this blue square here. If we use the selection tool and we click on it, you can see how these little tiny boxes pop up. Okay, there's a box on the top left, right, bottom, and on the sides. This is your transformation controls. The transformation controls allow you to actually change the scale, to rotate, and to skew a lot of the objects that you have in your document. We can also move the object around just by clicking on it. Clicking and holding with our mouse, and then we can move that object around. So let's say that we want this on the top left of our document. We can actually click on it and move it up. And then we can click off of it. So if we just click on our document somewhere, you can see that the transformations are no longer there anymore because we selected off of this object. And then if we want it back, we just click on it again, and there it is. Or we can click and hold and drag it, and we can kind of move it around. How to change the scale of it is actually on the corners and even on the sides. You can see we can change the scale like so. If we want it longer, we can grab the side and move it longer. If we want to change both sides, we can grab the corner. It's a great way of actually changing the size of it. Make it smaller, make it larger, and so on. You'll also notice that when we grab the corners of it, the change in the shape happens. So you can see here, if we change it to make it small or thin, that can happen. Do it vertical as well. But let's say that we want to keep this the same throughout. So the same on all sides. So let's pick a different shape. Let's try a star. So let's create a star in here for a second. So we have this star, right? And if we do that, you can see that it's squished. That doesn't really look like a star anymore, does it? No. So there's a thing called constraints. And what constraints are is basically keeping it the same on all sides. So if we were to grab this like so, this is a non-constraint object. However, if we hold Shift, it is now a constraint object because you can see that it does not change its length or anything. It just changes the size of it. So this is actually a constraint object here. So if we hold Shift, that's what keeps it constrained. So make sure you hold Shift when you're trying to keep things in constraint with your objects. We can also hold Shift and Alt, which is what I usually use, and that keeps it constrained with the center. So this one takes it from the top left side, keeps it constraint. That you can go here, and this will take it from the bottom left side, like so. Same with this side, Or you can do the middle, which is Shift and Alt. Hold down Shift and Alt, and then click on one of the corners, and you can see how it keeps it in constraint with a center alignment. The second tool is the Direct Selection tool, and this is the white arrow. And sometimes I'll refer to them as the black arrow or the white arrow, because there's two arrows here. Now the Direct Selection tool, what that does is actually changes the way an object is interacted with. So for instance, we have this star here, right? And you'll notice that when we get off the selection tool, this transformation controls, right? This actually disappears. And it actually puts these little tiny squares on the different types of points on an object. These are called your anchor points. And when we actually get into the pin tool in a minute, I'll kind of tell you what those anchor points are. However, with the Direct Selection tool, you can actually grab these specific anchor points and move them. So you can see how we can move these anchor points around, and we can pretty much change up the object a little bit. And we'll get into that a little bit more when we actually get into anchor points and how anchor points work. So you can see all of that was changed just by using the Direct Selection tool. So let's go back. And you can also change the way that the points work by clicking on these little tiny circles. So right now, if I do a selection box around the entire object, each one of these are selected. I can also select it individually. So if I do that, I can select it like that. See? Or I can select them all at the same time, click on it, and then bring this down. So you can see how it changes into a rounder type of object here. Okay? And so that's the basics of the Direct Selection tool, and we'll get more into that when we get into the pen tool. All right, so now we're going to go into the pen tool here. So the pen tool works like so. The pen tool essentially creates anchor points. That right there is an anchor point, and then it creates a path with another anchor point. So as long as I click on my screen, my document here, you'll see that it creates an anchor point and then a path. Okay? I can also create a path that is curved by clicking and holding down the anchor point and then curving that, like so. And then I can end it from the first anchor point and then create a full-fledged shape. The T tool is the type tool. This is for typography. So if I click once, you can see that it creates a line of type. And we have that right there. This is gibberish. This is basically not a language. It's just a placeholder for text. And I can actually change this. I can change the font of it, change the font. As you can see, different type of fonts. I can pick a font that I like, and we'll talk more about fonts a little later as well. I can change the size of it over here. I can change the size of it here. I can even change the size using the selection tool and changing it like so. I can also keep it in constraint, which is what we want to do. We want to keep it in constraint. And that's basically what the type tool does. And there's a few other things that we'll go through a little later when it comes to the typography. But just remember that the type tool creates typography. Then we have the shape tools. This is the shape tool here. This will create shapes for us, just automatic shapes that we have. We can change the color of it. And you can see that this creates a square, right? We can also create a rectangle. Okay. We can actually create a lot of different things with these basic shapes. So let's create a square, and then click on our selection tool, and we can rotate this, and we can actually make a diamond. See? We can rotate it with our selection tool and create a new shape, which is essentially a diamond here. Okay? You can also create other types of shapes. So we can do a rounded rectangular shape. So you can see that the points on this are actually round. We can actually go back and make it into a square if we wanted to as well. And you can see it turns into a circle once it gets smaller. However, we can use the ellipse. So we can do an ellipse, like so. So 3 different types of ellipse here. We have a vertical one, horizontal one, and then just a regular constraint circle, like so. We have a polygon tool. Like so. Just creates a polygon. And then we have the star tool as well. And these are just basic shapes that you could use within your document. How you use them is probably the more important aspect in achieving the typical goals that you're looking for when it comes to creating your objects. We have a brush tool here. Now, the thing is, I don't want you to use the brush. If you use the brush, what happens is that it's actually not what you think it may be. This is actually a path right here. Sometimes I'll get students that what they'll do is they'll go in with the brush and they'll start to basically paint in color. I do not want you to do this. If you do this, you will not pass. You will fail that particular assignment because this is not the correct way to utilize this brush. Because if we actually select this, what you'll see is you'll see a bunch of paths here. Okay, this is a bunch of paths. You do not want to utilize this brush this way. Okay, this is not how it works. So do not use that tool unless I show you how to utilize it the correct way. We also have the eraser tool here. So if we bring in a shape, for instance, let's just bring in a shape real quick. Like so, this green square. And we have an eraser. Now, here's the thing about the eraser tool. I don't want you to use the eraser tool because it's not going to work the way that you think it does. It does work exactly how an eraser works. So if I select and I hold it down and I just create an erased line, you can see that it will erase through that shape. But we don't really want to work that way. We don't really want to work this in this particular manner because there are easier and better ways to work with deleting or taking away specific anchor points within an object. Now, if we were in Photoshop, this would be a little bit different. But because we're in Illustrator, we don't exactly want to work in this direction. Now, we also have a really interesting tool called the width tool. And what the width tool is that when you create some type of path, it creates a stroke, or it can create a stroke. And we'll get into strokes a little bit more when we actually get into the paths. But what you can do is that you can actually change the width of this stroke by either changing the weight of it, like so, or using the width tool. And what the width tool does, it allows you to actually expand the width of the weight with a more customized ability. So I can actually change this up and change the way this looks, which makes it a little bit more interesting rather than a generic straight stroke. And it can really kind of change the game in the way that your products look. We also have is the gradient tool. Now the gradient tool, how that works is that it creates a gradient inside a shape. So first we have to click on the gradient here, change it to a gradient, and then we can click on the gradient tool and actually change the way this gradient looks. So we create a point. You can see the white point on this top and the black point on this top, on this part, and it just creates the way our gradient works throughout the shape. So we have two squares here. Now the sizes really don't matter here, but what we're looking at is actually the color of it. So let's say that we have a box here, that square here that does not have any color in it, and we want to have the same color of this added to this little square here. What we can do is we can actually grab the eyedropper tool. And this is the eyedropper tool. Click on that. I need to have this selected, and then I use the eyedropper tool and I select on what I want to take the color from. And you can see it changes that. This is a really good way of selecting color from, say, a raster image, which is like a picture, and taking that color and putting it into a shape. The next we want to look at is the hand tool. The hand tool is this. As you can see, there's a hand there. If we click and hold on our mouse, you can see that we can drag the artboard around like so. But there's actually a faster way to do this. If you hold spacebar, hold spacebar, and then it actually will change into a hand. So let's click on the selection tool first. And let's say we have the selection tool as our main tool, and then we click on spacebar. You can see that the hand pops up. This is a hotkey. Okay? Instead of actually going down here and selecting the hand, we can just push the spacebar on our keyboard, and then we can drag it around and move our document. It's a really easy and effective way to work, especially if your document is closed up like this, like zoomed in. It's a really, really effective way to work, and I think you should utilize it. Speaking of zooming in, the next tool is actually the magnifying glass tool. So you can see we have the magnifying glass tool here. If we hold down our mouse button, we can actually zoom in and out. So I'm just going left and right to zoom in and out, like so. I can also click on it, and it will zoom in to where I click. So I can zoom back out, like so. If you want to zoom out, you can hold Alt and click on it, like so. But there's actually a far more effective way to do this. So I'm going to click the selection tool. So let's say our selection tool is our main tool that we have right now, and I want to zoom in with hotkeys. What I can do is I can hold down Control on our keyboard and then click plus on our keyboard, and that will zoom in to the document. If we want to zoom out, we hold Control and push minus, and it zooms out just like that. So those are pretty much the tools that we'll use, that we'll utilize in the class. And there's a lot of tools in here that are fairly effective in creating some really cool stuff. For instance, line segment tools, more of the paintbrush tool effects. There's a pencil in there, the shape builder tools, the mesh tools. There's a lot of really interesting and cool tools that you can use. But for now, we're just going to use these basic tools for this particular class.